we all do the best we can, and we're all trying the hardest. And I'm just looking back at what gave us the most success. A winning formula in '08 for the last three Ryder Cups, and we need to consider maybe getting back to that formula that helped us play our best.
I am James, and this is Golf Relived. It's true what they say about Tom Watson's caddy finally revealing the problems behind the legend. For years, the world saw Watson as golf's ultimate gentleman, the gap-toothed Midwesterner who embodied every single virtue the sport held sacred, a man who nearly won the Open Championship at age 59, the steward of tradition, golf's class act. He was Byron Nelson's handpicked successor, commanding respect with stoic grace. But inside the tour, a different story was unfolding. Players knew him as cold, abrasive, a taskmaster who demanded total compliance and gave nothing back. The week it all came crashing down was the 2014 Ryder Cup. That was when the mask slipped in front of everyone. The week a team of elite professionals stopped trusting their captain. The week Watson's pristine reputation shattered under the weight of his own isolation. So how did golf's gentleman become a leader his own team could not stand? If you are loving this deep dive into golf history, show your support by giving hype to the video. It helps us bring you more untold stories from the sport we all love. The 2014 Ryder Cup at Gleneagles was supposed to be a triumph. Watson was chosen as captain for his toughness, his championship pedigree, his ability to inspire. The PGA of America believed his old-school mentality would bring discipline to a team that desperately needed structure and focus. Instead, it became the ugliest collapse in American Ryder Cup history. Not because of the score, though, that was bad enough, but because of what happened inside the team room. Watson treated 12 of the world's best golfers like subordinates, like soldiers who existed only to follow orders without question. The vibe was not a team environment. It was a courtroom, a dictatorship. Watson stood alone at the front, handing down decisions no one understood. His intentions might have been to inspire, but his delivery came across as authoritarianism, cloaked in the language of leadership. While the European team, led by Paul McGinley, buzzed with unity and a powerful sense of European identity, the American side felt like a prison. Players described it as unshackled dysfunction. No trust, no communication, no fun, just confusion and frustration mounting with every passing hour. Watson failed to create the environment his players needed. Modern golfers thrive in collaborative spaces where their voices are heard and their contributions matter. They want input. They want to feel valued and respected. Watson offered none of that. He was attempting to use 1993 tactics on a 2014 team. The generational gap was massive. Players did not trust his approach because he never earned that trust. He demanded respect for authority without understanding that authority must be mutual. Where they needed partnership, Watson gave orders. Where they needed encouragement, he gave silence. Watson's tactical decisions made everything worse. He benched Phil Mickelson and Keegan Bradley for the entire Saturday, two of the most passionate players on the team, sitting idle while the Europeans dominated. Then came the move that baffled everyone. On Friday morning, rookies Patrick Reed and Jordan Spieth destroyed their opponents 5 and 4. They were on fire, the hot hands of the competition. Watson's response? He sat them for the afternoon. He halted their momentum. Players could not understand it. Reed and Spieth felt devalued. They had just proven themselves and were ready to go again. Watson benched them anyway. When asked why, Watson said it was a gut decision. Not strategy, not data. Just gut instinct from a man who had not competed at that level in years. He created adversity within his own camp. He became the hunted instead of the hunter. The breaking point came with the participation gifts. After the devastating loss, Watson stood before his team. He was supposed to inspire them, thank them for their dedication. Instead, he looked at the replica Ryder Cup trophies given to each player and called them meaningless. He said the only thing that mattered was the real trophy, the win. Everything else was a participation award he viewed with contempt. To Watson, if you did not win, your presence meant nothing. For the players, that gift represented their hard work, their months of preparation. Watson crushed it all in one sentence. That comment was a devastating blow to morale. It reinforced everything they felt, that Watson valued the outcome more than the individuals achieving it, that he was cold, disconnected, unable to appreciate what his team gave him. The fallout was ugly. Players could not keep their criticism quiet. The world saw the dysfunction Watson created, but the 2014 disaster was not random. It was the result of a pattern that defined Watson's entire career. For decades, the world saw Watson as the ultimate old-school golfer. Respectful, articulate, traditional. A man who honored the rules and traditions above everything else. The media loved him. Fans admired him. He carefully maintained this facade through decades of measured interviews and calculated public statements. He presented himself as the heir to Jack Nicklaus and Byron Nelson, the guardian of golf's dignity and traditional values. But people who worked with him knew a different truth, a darker truth hidden beneath the surface. Watson was obsessed with control. He did not collaborate. He demanded compliance. In high-stakes competition, he sought submission. His behavior toward caddies and anyone beneath him was dismissive, sometimes cruel. If you made a mistake, even a tiny one, Watson treated it like betrayal. He never tolerated deviations from his internal logic. This was not just championship drive. It was a psychological mechanism of isolation. Watson built walls to stay focused, but those walls kept everyone else out. Even his closest allies remained at a distance. He was respected for his talent, feared for his coldness, never loved. The gap between the public gentleman and the private taskmaster was enormous. Publicly, he was patient and tactical. Privately, he demanded immediate perfection. Publicly, he was the wise elder statesman. Privately, he was dictatorial, rigid, exclusionary. Publicly, he inspired with his never-say-die spirit. Privately, he suffocated people with intensity that counted no costs. In front of cameras, he was articulate and respectful. In private, he was blunt and dismissive. The duality created an environment where people lived in constant anxiety, never knowing which version they would get. The weight Watson carried came from Byron Nelson. Nelson was known as Lord Byron, the paragon of golfing virtue, a man whose integrity and sportsmanship were legendary. His character was as impeccable as his swing. When Nelson chose Watson as his successor, he handed him an impossible burden. Watson had to wear the king's uniform of dignity and grace, the uniform of a true gentleman who represented everything pure and honorable about the game, but it never fit his natural temperament. Nelson's gentlemanly demeanor was effortless. For Watson, it was a performance requiring constant internal maintenance. The pressure created a crucible. Watson's natural intensity had to be suppressed, hidden beneath layers of politeness, but it never went away. It turned inward, building pressure. Then it radiated outward as suffocating demands on everyone around him. Where Nelson was empathetic and communal, Watson was inherently a loner. Where Nelson connected easily with people, Watson built walls. By trying to replicate Nelson's pristine image, Watson alienated himself from his peers. They saw the facade as emotional distance, coldness disguised as professionalism. Watson could never truly be Byron Nelson. The curse was that he spent his entire career trying. He adopted the public persona, the respectful interviews, the stoic demeanor, the traditional values. But underneath, his true nature fought against the role. This conflict manifested in his relationships. The suppressed intensity became outward pressure. The emotional distance grew. Watson was respected for living up to Nelson's standard, but disliked for the cost it demanded. He believed standards were everything, that excellence required perfection. This mindset came from honoring Nelson's legacy, but transformed into something darker, a rigid, unforgiving approach that left no room for humanity. No relationship shows this cost more clearly than Watson's partnership with Bruce Edwards. The public saw their bond as one of the greatest in sports history. 30 years together, loyalty through triumph and tragedy. But the internal reality was complicated. Edwards was not just a caddy. He was a psychological buffer who absorbed Watson's frustrations, the primary interface between the taskmaster and the world. The partnership was a crucible that tested Edwards' loyalty every day. Watson's approach to golf was clinical, demanding, unforgiving. He left no room for human error. Observers noted that the intensity often pushed Edwards into a death-like region of ooze and pressure, where demands exceeded what any professional colleague should endure. It was suffocating. Edwards had to suppress his own insights to maintain harmony. He could not question Watson's decisions even when he disagreed. He lived in constant professional anxiety. Despite 3 decades of collaboration, there was minimal personal warmth, just hierarchy, pressure, unrelenting demands. Edwards' role was to be the clerk of Watson's ambitions, a volunteer in a war for perfection that counted no costs. He was expected to read greens flawlessly, carry clubs perfectly, make calculations instantly, absorb blame silently. Edwards loved Watson, admired his talent, respected his commitment, but he lived in the shadow of a player who demanded a level of focus that was claustrophobically devastating. Watson hated distractions with ferocity. Any deviation from absolute focus was treated as betrayal. Edwards had to live inside that standard every day for 30 years. When Watson made mistakes, he sometimes treated Edwards as a scapegoat. If a read was wrong, it was the caddy's fault. Edwards frequently served this role, absorbing Watson's anger so it did not spill into the public eye. The gone just a bit too far threshold was Watson's defining characteristic. He pushed until he crossed a line, then backed off slightly. But the damage was done. Edwards understood this cycle and accepted it, because he knew no one else could handle it. The truth of their partnership was simple. It was not a friendship of equals. It was rigidly hierarchical, with Watson as the absolute dictator. Edwards loved the man, but the cost was enormous. He stayed because he was uniquely capable of enduring this suffocating pressure. Watson's pattern of isolation extended far beyond Edwards. Throughout his career, he was a loner who preferred a quiet life, going to bed early while other players bonded over dinner, staying in his hotel room while tour veterans built friendships. avoiding the camaraderie that defined professional golf. While other pros spent late nights building relationships, Watson was asleep. This stark contrast served him well as an individual competitor. His discipline was legendary. His focus was absolute, but it was a fatal flaw in team settings. Watson never learned how to connect on a personal level. He never understood that leadership requires trust, not just authority. For him, respect came from achievement, from standards, not from emotional connection. This worked in solo competition, but failed completely in team environments. By 2014, his management style was obsolete. The modern era of golf was built on collaboration. Player input was valued. Partnerships between caddies and golfers were celebrated. Captains inspired through connection, not fear. Watson's dictatorship was a relic of when players were soldiers, not partners. When captains barked orders and players followed without question. But the world had changed. Modern athletes were CEOs of their own brands. They demanded respect. They expected input. They required emotional intelligence from leaders. Watson's inability to bridge that gap left him isolated in a room full of people. He stood behind faceless authority, ignoring the faces and identities of the men he was supposed to lead. The same suffocating pressure he exerted on Edwards for 30 years, he now exerted on his Ryder Cup team. But these players, unlike Edwards, had the power to push back. They were peers, equals. They refused to accept what Edwards had endured for decades. Watson had become a rock in the middle of a raging storm. Unmovable, unchanging, but a rock cannot lead. It can only stand still while waves of change wash over it. The golf world had moved on. Team dynamics had evolved. Leadership philosophy had transformed. But Watson remained frozen in the past, attempting to impose 1993 tactics on 2014 reality. The collision was inevitable and brutal. The aftermath of the 2014 Ryder Cup changed everything. The PGA of America could not ignore what happened. The public humiliation, the player mutiny, the complete breakdown of trust. They created a task force to prevent future disasters. Never again allow a captain to make reckless gut-based decisions without player input. Never again permit a dictatorship disguised as leadership. The task force was a direct response to Watson's failures. Every policy change traced back to something he did wrong. The new system prioritized unity over authority. It demanded that players trust the approach. That meant transparency, communication, collaboration. Everything Watson refused to provide. The focus shifted to replicating the European model, building team environments where collaboration mattered more than hierarchy, where players felt valued, not disposable. The Americans looked at Paul McGinley's leadership and saw everything Watson was not. McGinley fostered European identity. McGinley built unity. McGinley made his players feel appreciated. The policy changes moved away from out-of-touch elder statesmen. Watson represented the old guard, legends who won majors decades ago but could not relate to the modern generation. The task force recognized that captaincy required more than past glory. It required the ability to connect on a personal level. Generational captains became the new standard, leaders who understood contemporary culture. Watson's dictatorship became the cautionary tale, the example of what not to do. Every change was a rejection of his approach. The American Ryder Cup policy was rewritten because of him. So what do we make of Tom Watson? Was he a villain or a victim of his own greatness? The truth is somewhere in the middle. Watson was not evil. He genuinely believed his approach was right. That discipline and standards would lead to victory. His intentions might have been honest, but the cost of his pursuit of perfection was real, and the people around him paid for it. Bruce Edwards endured 30 years of suffocating pressure, 3 decades of professional anxiety, absorbing Watson's frustrations, serving as a lightning rod, all while maintaining public loyalty to a man who rarely showed personal warmth. The 2014 Ryder Cup team suffered through a week of dysfunction and public humiliation. They felt devalued, confused, disrespected. Their commitment was questioned. Their efforts were called meaningless. Watson's obsession with control, his inability to connect, his cold demeanor, these were not accidents. They were choices. Choices that made him a champion but left him utterly alone. The Ryder Cup disaster was not random. It was the same mindset Watson carried throughout his career. The pursuit of perfection, the demand for total compliance, the isolation from building walls instead of bridges. It all crashed down at Gleneagles because the players refused to accept what Edwards had accepted for 30 years. They pushed back. They spoke out. They exposed the dark truth. The gentleman golfer persona was always a facade. Underneath was a taskmaster who valued the trophy more than the people fighting for it. The meaningless replicas he dismissed were all his players had left after a captaincy that crushed their spirit. But here is the truth we cannot ignore. Watson's discipline and standards were extraordinary. His achievements speak for themselves. 8 major championships, 72 weeks as the #1 ranked golfer in the world, one of the greatest careers in golf history. He pushed himself harder than almost anyone who ever played the game. That intensity made him great. The problem was not the pursuit of perfection. It was the cost he demanded from others in that pursuit. Leadership is not just about standards. It is about trust, connection, respect, making the people around you feel valued, not disposable. Watson forgot that lesson, or maybe he never learned it. His legacy is a reminder that greatness without humanity leaves a hollow victory. You can be the best in the world and still fail the people who needed you most. You can win every trophy and still lose the respect of your peers. You can chase perfection and still end up utterly alone. Tom Watson was golf's gentleman on the surface, the steward of tradition, the heir to Byron Nelson. But beneath that pristine image was a man who built walls so high, even his closest allies could not reach him. That is the dark truth his caddy and his players finally revealed. The truth that excellence and isolation often walk hand in hand. The truth that the cost of greatness is sometimes paid by the people standing in the shadow of the champion. Watson remains a legend. His place in golf history is absolutely secure and undeniable. But his legacy is complicated by the reality of what it took to achieve that greatness, and who paid the price along the way. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check out more untold tales from golf history. Thanks for watching. I am James, and this is Golf Relived.